It was supposed to be just a simple day hike. Tom and I had always loved escaping into the woods. We'd gotten the usual warnings about getting lost, but we figured a few hours on a trail we'd walked 100 times before wouldn't be an issue. That was the last time I ever trusted a map or anything that seemed familiar. It was about midday when we decided to veer off the path. We had a clear goal, reached the top of the ridge before sunset, but we got distracted by something odd. There was a break in the trees that seemed to invite us in, a gap like a hidden doorway into another world. The air around us seemed to shift when we stepped off the trail. Thicker, colder, like something unseen had stirred. At first we laughed about it, making jokes to keep the mood light. But the deeper we walked, the quieter it got. The usual sounds of the forest, birds, the rustle of leaves, faded until it felt like the woods were holding their breath. "Dude, where the hell are we?" Tom asked, looking around. His voice was sharp, anxious. I checked my phone. No signal. My watch flickered between numbers. Not a good sign. "I think we've wandered off a bit. Let's just head back." But when we turned around to retrace our steps, everything looked different. The trees, once spaced apart with a comfortable familiarity, now pressed in closer. The path, what little of it there was, had disappeared. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed it whole. "All right, this is messed up," I muttered. "I don't think we're going the right way." Tom's face paled. "Are we lost?" I didn't want to admit it, but I had no idea where we were. My gut twisted, but I tried to remain calm. "Let's just keep going. We'll find the way out." We walked for what felt like hours. The light began to dim under the canopy, casting eerie shadows on the ground. Then we found it. A clearing too perfect to be natural, and the sight hit me like a punch to the chest. In the center of the clearing was a stone altar, weathered and dark with age. Around it, strange symbols were carved into the trees. Symbols that didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. It was a place untouched by time, and yet it reeked of something ancient. Something wrong. "What is this?" Tom whispered. His voice trembled. Before I could respond, the air around us shifted. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. From behind the trees we heard the soft shuffle of footsteps, followed by low chanting. I froze. Tom and I exchanged a look, our breaths shallow. The chanting grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't a language I recognized, but it was undeniably old. The kind of language that burrowed into your skin, whispering from places you couldn't see, making your blood run cold. I barely had time to react when they appeared. A group of men dressed in tattered robes emerged from the shadows. Their faces were hidden beneath hoods, but their eyes, when they looked at us, were wide, unblinking, and far too calm, like they had been waiting for us. My heart hammered in my chest. We need to go," I gasped, but my legs felt like lead. It was as if the forest itself had turned against us, trapping us here. One of the robed figures stepped forward, his voice like a rasping whisper. "The chosen have arrived." I didn't understand. My mind was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the group. Something about them, something about their stillness, was worse than any wild animal we'd ever come across. It was the calm before a storm. Tom grabbed my arm, his grip tight and desperate. "We need to go. Now!" I snapped out of my trance, and together we bolted. We ran through the trees, branches slapping against us, but the sounds of the chanting didn't stop. It felt like they were following us, closing in. But when I glanced back, the clearing was gone. The forest around us looked just as unfamiliar as before. We didn't stop running. Not when we stumbled through brush, not when our lungs screamed for air, not even when we reached a ridge and saw the setting sun below us. We ran until our feet bled, until the world blurred, until we reached the edge of the forest and stumbled onto the main trail again. I looked back, half expecting to see figures moving in the distance, watching us, waiting for us to return. But there was nothing. Just the whisper of the wind and the fading echo of the chanting in my ears. We didn't speak much on the hike back. Tom kept glancing over his shoulder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there. That they were still out there. I've been back to the woods since then. I've tried to shake it off, to ignore the creeping feeling that we didn't just get lost that day. But I know better now. There are places in this world where the shadows stretch a little too far, and the silence speaks in a voice you're not meant to hear. But something found us, and it's still waiting.